Thanks for tuning in to Animal Attacks. Today, we're examining a shark attack that started with an impactful, powerful enough to damage a luxury yacht and ended with multiple victims in the water. From four swimmers forced to face a great white shark in open water to an open water swimmer alone in the water when a great white shark arrived from the deep. It was July 14th, 2017. Catalina Island sits about 22 miles off the coast of Los Angeles. That afternoon, the water was calm and blue-green, and a yacht sat anchored about 3 miles off the island's sheltered side. Phil Del Vecchio was 41, a confident contractor from San Diego. Elena Kaspar was 36, an athletic graphic designer from Pasadena. Kurt Farrell was 39, Phil's longtime friend and the least experienced swimmer in the group. Gwyneth Halverson was 34, Elena's co-worker and a first-time open ocean swimmer. By 2:30, all four were in the water off the stern platform. They stayed within about 30 feet of the yacht, swimming casually. The water was clear, with nothing visible beneath them. A deckhand on the stern spotted a dark shape moving under the surface about 50 feet off the port side. It disappeared before he got a good look. After a minute or two, he dismissed it and went back to lunch. It's easy to judge that decision afterward. In the moment, a dark shape in the water probably didn't seem worth sounding an alarm over. Great white sharks are the largest predatory fish on Earth, capable of reaching lengths of 20 feet and weights exceeding 5,000 pounds. At 2:51, the shark surged upward into the swim platform from below. The impact cracked the fiberglass and partially collapsed it inward, sending a shockwave through the water that scattered them away from the boat. Kurt reached the platform first. He grabbed the broken edge and pulled himself up, tearing a deep gash along his left forearm on the cracked fiberglass. Gwyneth was right behind him when the shark came back around. It caught her across the back of her left calf before she wrenched herself free and Kurt pulled her aboard. She collapsed onto the deck as the shark's momentum carried it past the hull. Phil and Elena were still in the water. The shark came from below and to Phil's left. It struck him across the left hip and lower torso. He remained at the surface for a few seconds as the water around him darkened quickly. Elena was about 15 feet away. She froze for a moment and the shark caught her across the upper right thigh. She disappeared briefly beneath the surface before resurfacing face up, her arms moving without any clear direction. The deckhand threw a life ring toward Phil. It landed within arm's reach, but Phil didn't take it. This is the point where people usually start imagining what they would have done differently. The problem is that events like this unfold much faster than they seem to hindsight. The captain was on the radio by 2:53. He watched Phil stop moving. He watched Elena struggle to stay afloat. He watched the dorsal fin cut a slow arc between them and the yacht. Neither of them made it back. Phil was found floating face down about 180 feet from the yacht. Elena was recovered roughly 40 feet away after spending 22 minutes in the water. Resuscitation efforts aboard the rescue vessel were unsuccessful. Harbor Patrol arrived at 3:19, 26 minutes after the distress call. The shark was still nearby and spotted within 80 feet of the recovery site. No divers entered the water. Phil and Elena were recovered from the surface, while Kurt and Gwyneth were taken ashore for treatment. A later survey deemed the damaged yacht a total loss. Phil's injuries were concentrated around the left hip and lower torso. The bite measured about 19 inches across, consistent with a great white shark Carcharodon carcharias, estimated at 13 to 15 feet. The left iliac artery had been completely severed. The coroner ruled the cause of death hemorrhagic shock and noted that survival was unlikely regardless of response time. Elena's cause of death was also hemorrhagic shock. The bite to her upper right thigh had lacerated the femoral artery, and the blood loss sustained during the 22 minutes she spent in the water was determined to be unsurvivable. Kurt was treated for a deep forearm laceration. Gwyneth suffered a bite wound to the left calf and a shoulder dislocation. Both survived and eventually recovered. The case was classified as a predatory great white shark attack that resulted in 2 deaths and 2 non-fatal injuries. Up the California coast, a commercial diver was working alone on a kelp reef with almost no visibility when a shark emerged from the dark behind him. It was September 3rd, 2020. North of Jenner, California, the Sonoma County coastline is lined with rocky shelves, dense kelp forests, and cold water that keeps most people out. That morning, swells were running 4 to 6 feet and the surface temperature was 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Derek Regan was 44 and had worked as a commercial abalone diver along this stretch of coast for more than 14 years. He ran a one-man operation out of a modified aluminum skiff and knew this reef as well as most people know their own neighborhood. Diving alone wasn't unusual for him. Bringing on a second diver meant splitting the catch, and the margins were already thin. He launched at 6:40 that morning, anchored about 300 feet offshore, and slipped into the water. His setup was standard for the work: a 7mm wetsuit, weight belt, mesh collection bag, a short pry tool, and a surface float with a dive flag tethered to his belt. The first dive went as expected. He surfaced with a partial bag, rested briefly, and went back down around 8:15. The kelp was thick that morning, and visibility was limited to about 6 feet in most directions. About 7 minutes into the dive, his float line suddenly went taut above him. Not from current. Something had passed through it at the surface. He looked up, watched the line go slack again, and waited. Nothing moved in the water around him. A float line catching on something isn't the kind of thing that automatically sends an experienced diver back to the surface. After a moment, he turned back to the rock face. Great white sharks are ambush predators that rely heavily on surprise, typically approaching from below and behind their target. They possess electroreceptors called ampullae of Lorenzini that allow them to detect the faint electrical fields generated by muscle movement, making them capable of locating prey in conditions of near zero visibility. The shark came from beyond the edge of the kelp, where visibility dropped to almost nothing. There was no warning. In 6 feet of visibility, at 23 feet of depth, there wouldn't have been. It struck from behind, clamping onto Derek's head and neck, and driving him forward into the rock shelf. The force held him there for several seconds before the shark released and moved back out into open water. Derek never surfaced. His weight belt kept him pinned to the bottom while his float drifted above, slack and unmoving, giving no sign to anyone on shore that something had gone wrong. His skiff sat at anchor 300 feet away. The nearest other person was miles up the coast. A recreational kayaker came across the unmanned dive flag at around 10:40 in the morning, more than 2 hours after the attack. Noticed the line running straight down without any movement and called for help on her cell phone. A rescue vessel arrived 38 minutes later. Divers entered the water and followed the float line to the bottom, finding Derek at 23 feet, still clipped to his weight belt with his collection bag in his hand. The coroner's examination found bilateral crush fractures of the temporal and parietal bones of the skull, fractures at the second and third cervical vertebrae, and severe compression damage to the brainstem. Death was attributed to traumatic brain injury and cervical spinal cord compression resulting from a single bite by a great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias. The wound dimensions and bite geometry were consistent with a great white shark between 12 and 16 feet in length. Derek's skiff, float, and collection bag were recovered at the scene. The bag contained 11 abalone. His pry tool was still attached to his wrist lanyard. His dive watch recorded its last movement at 8:22 in the morning. The case was ruled an accidental death, and no further investigation was conducted beyond the coroner's review. More than anything else, This is one of those stories that makes me hesitate before calling someone experienced safe. The attack was brutal, but what stays with me is what happened afterward. How long would that dive flag have drifted there if the kayaker hadn't come along? Somewhere off the coast of Northern California, a fishing guide was about to take a client out on a morning trip that would end with him at the bottom of the ocean in 40 feet of water. It was June 9th, 2016. Bodega Bay sits about 60 miles north of San Francisco along the Northern California coast. That morning, swells were running 2 to 3 feet and the water was cold and stained green-brown from coastal upwelling. Jeff Nolan was 51 and had been running kayak fishing trips out of Bodega Bay for nearly a decade. He knew the nearshore reef structures well enough to put clients on fish consistently. His client that morning was a 46-year-old software engineer from Sacramento who had booked the trip as a birthday gift to himself. He had kayaked before, but never in the open ocean. Jeff had gone over the basics before they launched. The client was wearing a personal flotation device. Jeff was not. They launched at 7:15 from a small gravel beach north of the harbor and paddled about a mile offshore to a reef Jeff knew well. By 9 o'clock, both had landed 2 fish stored in mesh bags trailing beside their kayaks. At around 9:20, the client mentioned seeing something large pass beneath his kayak. Jeff saw nothing and suggested it was probably a halibut or a leopard shark. 10 minutes later, Jeff felt a firm push from below. He looked into the dark water, saw nothing, and pulled his catch bag onto his lap. That's one of the unsettling things about kayak fishing. You're close enough to the water to feel what's beneath you, but not necessarily to see it. He told the client they would move in a few minutes, then made one last cast. Great white sharks have highly developed olfactory systems capable of detecting blood and organic compounds in concentrations as low as 1 part per million, allowing them to track potential food sources from considerable distances. The strike came at 9:37. The shark hit the underside of Jeff's kayak hard enough to lift the stern from the water and roll it sideways. Jeff surfaced beside the overturned hull and managed to get it partially upright before the shark returned. This time, it did not hit the kayak. It came from below and behind Jeff's position in the water, and the bite closed around his lower torso, from the lower back through to the front of the abdomen. The force drove him downward and backward simultaneously, and his grip on the hull broke. He went under and did not come back up. The client was about 30 feet away. He saw Jeff's hands come off the kayak, and then there was nothing, just the empty hull drifting upright and a dark spread moving across the surface where Jeff had been. The client did not enter the water. Given the shark was still somewhere in the area, there was little else he could safely do. He held both kayaks together and reached for his cell phone, which was in a waterproof case clipped to his life jacket. It took him 3 attempts to get the call through. The rescue vessel arrived at 10:18, 37 minutes after the call connected at 9:41. The client had been alone on the water for close to 40 minutes by the time help reached him. A surface search that afternoon found no sign of Jeff. The following morning, a dive team located his body in 41 feet of water, roughly 300 yards from where the kayak had capsized. Visibility underwater was poor, and the recovery took several hours. The post-mortem examination found that the bite had destroyed both iliac vessels and caused extensive damage to the abdominal cavity. The coroner determined that the blood loss was unsurvivable and that drowning occurred alongside the hemorrhage rather than afterward. The report also identified the absence of a personal flotation device as a contributing factor. Trailing fish bags in the water alongside the kayaks was also noted, as it could attract great white shark from a considerable distance. Jeff's fishing rod was recovered floating about half a mile south of the capsized site the following afternoon. The client's account and the physical evidence were sufficient to establish the full sequence of events. The case was ruled an accidental death. I keep thinking about the fact that Jeff's job was taking people out on the water and bringing them back. In the end, he was the one they had to go looking for. Further up the coast near Massachusetts, a group of wreck divers surfaced from a routine dive to find their boat engine dead and a shark that had been circling the wreck the entire time they were underwater. It was October 19, 2013. 12 miles off the coast of Gloucester, Massachusetts, a dense fog bank sat over the water. Swells were running 3 to 4 feet, and visibility was less than 100 feet. Greg Halverson was 47, a mechanical engineer from Boston with more than a decade of wreck diving experience in New England waters. He had organized the trip and had a habit of entering first and exiting last. The 3 divers with him had far less experience in cold water wreck environment. Their boat was a 32-foot fiberglass vessel operated by a friend who had made the run before. The wreck sat in 54 feet of water and the dive itself went smoothly. After 38 minutes on the bottom, the group began their ascent. What they didn't know was that the boat's engine had died while they were underwater. The captain had tried to adjust for drift when the engine sputtered and quit. It's the kind of problem that sounds inconvenient until you see what happened next. By the time the first diver surfaced, the boat had already drifted about 60 feet from the descent line. The captain told everyone to swim over. The fog had thickened while they were below, and the boat was barely visible from the water. If you've never been out in heavy fog, it's hard to appreciate how quickly you can lose sight of, well, your surroundings. The first 3 divers reached the ladder and climbed aboard without trouble. Greg surfaced last about 40 feet away and started swimming toward the boat. He was halfway there when the captain spotted a large dark shape moving just beneath the surface and shouted a warning. Great white sharks in New England waters have increased significantly in number since the passage of the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972, which allowed gray seal populations along Cape Cod to recover and expand. At the time of this incident, great whites in the western North Atlantic were estimated to be capable of reaching speeds of up to 25 miles per hour in short bursts during an attack. Greg reached the ladder at 11:14. He had both hands on the lower rung and one fin on the bottom step when the great white shark struck from below. The bite closed over both legs and hit with enough force to bend the ladder and partially tear it away from the transom. Greg's grip broke and the shark pulled him under. Think about how close he was. He had already reached the ladder. His dry suit briefly slowed the descent as trapped air resisted being pulled underwater, but it made no difference. Both femoral arteries had been severed and both femurs fractured in the same bite. Greg went under at 11:14 and never resurfaced. The 3 divers on the deck watched it happen from the stern. The captain fired a flare into the water near the last position out of reflex and then reached for the radio. A response vessel arrived at 12:02, 45 minutes after the distress call. The fog forced rescuers to travel at reduced speed the entire way. The surviving divers and captain were transferred aboard. Greg's lower body was found about 18 feet beneath the boat, held in place by trapped air inside the dry suit. His upper body was recovered the following morning, roughly 30 feet away. Investigators believe the great white shark had likely returned after the initial attack, though that conclusion was based on physical evidence rather than direct observation. The post-mortem examination documented complete amputation of both legs at the mid-thigh, with both femoral arteries fully severed. The coroner determined that Greg died from hemorrhagic shock, with drowning as a secondary factor. His dive computer showed he had surfaced at 11:09, just 5 minutes before the attack. The engine failure was later traced to a fuel pump that had been malfunctioning for weeks. It's hard to look at a stalled engine the same way after reading a story like this. Its failure didn't cause the attack, but it changed the situation in ways nobody expected. Even with years of experience and a careful plan, Greg never stood a chance once the Great White made its move. Farther south, A competitive surfer was about to discover that the difference between a close call and a fatal encounter can come down to a single wave. It was August 7th, 2014, south of Santa Cruz, California. The morning started with a clean 4 to 6 foot swell and a sky just beginning to brighten. The water was 62 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind was light, and only a few surfers were out before sunrise. Scattered along the reef, Kayla Farrell was 24 and had been surfing since she was a child. She was a regular at this break, known for her focus and for putting in extra hours before school or contest. That morning, she drove herself to the beach, texted her mom to check in, and paddled out just after 6:30. There were two other surfers in the water, both adults, sitting farther down the reef. Kayla's plan was to work on her backhand, hoping to sharpen her turns before the next regional event. I've always thought surfers have a different relationship with the ocean than most people. A lot of them know their local break the way other people know their neighborhood. By 7, she was sitting on her board in the inside section, waiting for a set. The water was clear enough to see the reef below. One of the other surfers noticed a large shadow pass beneath him, moving quickly toward the inside, but he kept it to himself, thinking it was just a big fish. To be fair, surfers see shadows all the time. Most of them turn out to be exactly what they look like: nothing. The first wave of the set arrived larger than expected and broke earlier than usual. Kayla turned to paddle over it, but was caught inside. She duck dived under the foam, surfaced on the backside, and immediately started paddling hard to get outside before the next wave. She was still prone on her board, arms digging, when the water beneath her shifted. Great white sharks are responsible for the majority of unprovoked fatal shark attacks on surfers worldwide. And researchers believe many of these involve a case of mistaken identity. A surfer on a board viewed from below closely resembles a sea lion or seal in silhouette. There was no warning. The great white shark came from below and to her left, its jaws closing over the left side of her board and her left thigh in a single bite. The force lifted her partially out of the water and twisted the board violently. Her femur broke and the femoral artery was cut. The shark rolled once, then released and disappeared into deeper water. Kayla surfaced, still attached to her board by the leash, on her back, her left leg trailing in the water. The water around her darkened quickly. She was conscious but unable to call out. One of the other surfers saw her struggling and paddled over, reaching her within about 90 seconds. He pulled her onto his board, keeping her head above water, and started paddling for shore. It's easy to focus on the attack itself, but those two surfers deserve a lot of credit for what happened next. The second surfer followed close behind, helping to steady the boards as they moved through the whitewater. They reached the sand at 7:16. Kayla was still breathing but unresponsive. One of the surfers used his leash as a tourniquet, wrapping it around her upper thigh and twisting it tight with a piece of driftwood. It slowed the bleeding but could not stop it. Emergency services were called at 7:13 while they were still paddling in. Paramedics arrived at 7:31. Kayla lost consciousness before they reached her and was pronounced dead at the hospital later that morning. The coroner's report described a deep bite wound to the upper left thigh with complete transection of the femoral artery and a mid-shaft femur fracture. The blood loss was rapid and severe, and the report noted that even with immediate intervention, survival would have been unlikely. The surfboard showed a crescent-shaped bite on the left rail, with tooth marks matching a great white shark estimated at 10 to 13 feet in length. Kayla's wetsuit, leash, and the improvised tourniquet were collected as evidence. Maybe it's because I grew up around surfers, but stories like this always feels different to me. The ocean is a part of their routine right up until something happens that, well, no amount of experience can prepare you for. Even the most familiar waves can hide what's coming next. On a remote Oregon beach, a paddleboarder was about to discover how quickly a peaceful sunrise can become a struggle for survival. It was May 22nd, 2018. Along the southern Oregon coast, a quiet weekday morning settled over the narrow gravel beaches below the cliffs. The sky was overcast and the water temperature was 47 degrees Fahrenheit. Louis Prudhomme was 41, a high school biology teacher from Coos Bay who had taken up stand-up paddleboarding a few years earlier as a way to unwind before work. He wasn't a competitive athlete, but he had grown comfortable paddling this stretch of coastline and often went out alone. His phone was stored in a dry bag strapped to the board, protected but out of reach if he ended up in the water. He parked at a highway pullout just before 6 in the morning, carried his 12-foot inflatable board down the trail to the beach, and launched shortly after. He paddled south along the shoreline, staying within a couple hundred feet of the rocks at a relaxed pace. The coast was empty in both directions, with no other vessels on the water and no one on the beach behind him. Some people love that kind of solitude. On mornings like this, it can cut both ways. He had been out for about 40 minutes and covered close to a mile and a half when something struck the underside of his board from below hard enough to knock him into the water. It was a blunt impact, not a bite. He surfaced immediately, grabbed the tail handle, and looked around. The water was dark and visibility was limited to just a few feet. Nothing was visible, and he wasn't hurt. Getting back on the board was the natural thing to do. He moved along the left rail, placed both hands on the edge, and began kicking to pull himself up. He had done it countless times before. He was halfway onto the board when the shark came back. Great white sharks frequently make initial contact with an unfamiliar object without biting, a behavior known as a spy hop or investigatory bump, before deciding whether to commit to a full attack. Researchers believe this behavior allows the animal to assess whether a potential prey item is worth pursuing. It came from below and to his left. The jaws closed over his left shoulder and chest, while both hands were still gripping the board. The force fractured multiple ribs and drove bone fragments into the lung beneath them. Blood and air began filling the chest cavity almost immediately. The shark held the bite for a couple of seconds before releasing and moving away. It did not return. Louis did not go under. He managed to get his right arm over the board and hold himself against it, half draped across the rail with his legs still in the water. His left arm was badly damaged and no longer responding. Unable to pull himself fully aboard but unwilling to let go, he remained there and drifted. His phone was 18 inches away in the dry bag on the deck. He could see it. He could not reach it without releasing his grip on the board, and he was not going to do that. But then, everything had become very simple. Hold on, don't let go, and hope someone comes along. The current carried him slowly north, back toward his launch point, over the course of the next 20 to 30 minutes. A man walking his dog along the beach noticed the board drifting close to the shoreline and waded out to pull it in. He found Louis draped over it and called for help immediately. Paramedics reached the beach at 8:19, 37 minutes after the call. The remote location slowed the response. Louis had no pulse when they arrived. Resuscitation efforts continued during transport, but he was pronounced dead at 9:05. The post-mortem found multiple rib fractures, a collapsed left lung, and severe chest trauma. The coroner determined that Louis died from respiratory failure caused by the injuries, with blood loss as a secondary factor. I keep thinking about how close he ended up to shore. Close enough for someone walking a dog to find him. Up the New England coast, a swim coach was about to attempt a solo channel crossing in Maine waters that had seen a significant increase in great white activity over the previous few years. It was July 29th, 2019. Off the coast of Maine, the channel between the mainland and a small island was calm that morning. The water was 59 degrees Fahrenheit and the outgoing tide was running steadily southwest. Lyle Calabro was 43, a swim coach and former collegiate swimmer who had been doing open water swims in Maine for more than a decade. He had completed this channel crossing twice before and treated it as a personal benchmark each summer. I understand the appeal of traditions like that. The same route, the same distance year after year. Before leaving home that morning, he told his wife where he was going. Unlike his first crossing, he had not arranged for a support kayaker. His phone remained locked in his car. In the water, he carried only a wetsuit, goggles, and a bright orange swim cap. He entered the water at 6:04 from a small public boat ramp and began the crossing. His pace was steady, the water was clear, and the island remained visible ahead of him. Nothing about the first 20 minutes suggested anything unusual. About 400 yards to the north, a lobsterman was checking traps when he noticed a sudden disturbance on the surface at around 6:26. He later described it as a brief eruption of white water that lasted only a few seconds before the channel went calm again. Unsure what he had seen, he returned to work. A few minutes later, something about it continued to bother him, and he turned the boat around to investigate. In a lot of these stories, someone notices something unusual and shrugs it off. In this case, it's hard to say exactly when curiosity turned into concern. Great white sharks are known to execute what researchers describe as high-speed lateral charges when targeting larger prey, approaching at nearly horizontal angles to maximize the force of the initial bite. Unlike the upward strike commonly used against seals, this attack geometry is associated with prey items that are at or near the surface level, such as open water swimmers. There was no warning before the strike. The great white shark came from Lyle's right side and slightly below, moving at full speed in a lateral charge with its body nearly horizontal at the moment of contact. The jaws closed on his right side from the lower rib cage to the upper hip. At the same instant, the animal's full momentum drove through him. The force fractured 4 ribs on the right side, collapsed the right lung, and snapped the thoracic spine at the level of the 8th and 9th vertebrae, severing the spinal cord at that level. The shark released on contact and did not return. The spinal injury left Lyle unable to move and quickly led to cardiovascular collapse. He was face down in the water almost immediately after the strike, kept afloat only by the buoyancy of his wetsuit. His orange swim cap remained in place. His goggles were knocked off by the impact and were never recovered. The lobsterman reached him at around 6:31. He looped a line under Lyle's arms and pulled him onto the deck of his vessel. There were no signs of life. He called for help on his marine radio at 6:33. A response vessel arrived at 7:01, 28 minutes after the call. A medical team examined Lyle on the lobsterman's vessel, and he was pronounced dead at 7:09. The post-mortem confirmed fractures of the right 6th through 9th ribs, complete collapse of the right lung, and fracture dislocation of the thoracic spine at the 8th and 9th vertebrae with full transection of the spinal cord. The coroner attributed death to neurogenic shock resulting from the spinal cord injury, with hemothorax as a contributing factor, and noted that loss of consciousness would have occurred within seconds of the strike and that the injury was not survivable under any circumstances. Lyle's car was at the boat ramp with his phone inside. His training notebook was in his bag on the back seat, open to that morning's entry. His wife reported him missing at 9:15 when he had not come home. She was notified of his death later that morning. The case was ruled an accidental death. There is something unsettling about how ordinary his morning was, right up until that moment. He was just checking traps when someone else's story suddenly became part of his.